What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're going to be talking about Assetto Corsa's 1.5 update. Now, alongside the update, there was also a bonus DLC package released, which I'm not going to spend too terribly much time talking about, and I don't even think I have any footage lined up to put into this video relating to that bonus DLC, but that is free to all owners of Assetto Corsa, and as part of that bonus DLC, there's 3 cars and 1 track. The 3 cars, the brand new Corvette C7 Stingray, which is the base model, not the fearsome monster that is the Z06. Sadly enough, because that car ends up falling into its own little place and it has no friends, and it's just all like, why did nobody love me? Basically. The 2015 Ford Mustang GT, the 5-liter, which actually does kind of have some friends. It'll hang out with the M3 and the M4 and some of the other cars in that similar type of performance category. And then the Fiat Abarth 595, because why not? Some people have been complaining that they even added this car. If you're complaining that they added this car, you're doing it wrong. And then the one circuit is Black Cat County, which is basically, well, a southwestern American set of highways and roads combined into a track. Sort of a streetcar type of place where you would be driving a streetcar, I guess. I don't know. Personally, it reminded me a lot of some of the classic Need for Speed tracks in terms of its environment and driving cars through there at blazing speeds and things like that. But I wasn't really too terribly much of a fan, and it's just kind of a thing that's its own oddity. But if you're a fan of those types of like street circuits, for lack of a better term, you might have some fun there. So let's go ahead and get into the 1.5 update itself. First of all, what you see in the background is some gameplay racing against the AI, which has had some significant improvements and tweaks, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. As usual, if you want the full changelog, you can find that down in the description below, because I'm not going to hit on everything because a lot of it doesn't really need to be discussed. So besides the DLC, they've also gone ahead and updated several tracks to their more modern standards visually. That'd be the Nürburgring GP circuit, Silverstone, Monza, Spa, Nürburgring, Nordschleife, Mugello, Magione, Imola, the Drift circuit, and Vallelunga, where they've also added in a new layout, which basically shortcuts the extra hairpin that they added a few years back, I guess, there in the real world. So yeah, and actually these tracks do look notably better, especially in the case of the Nürburgring GP circuit, which absolutely looked terrible beforehand because it was a very old circuit that they brought forward from one of their previous games. But fortunately, it now looks passable. It looks solid. You can now actually use it without being all like, why does this track look so garbage? So thumbs up on that. Next up, and in one of the highly requested features for Assetto Corsa, and often complained about, pit stops are now enabled in single player, which means that you can do long distance races and, well, make pit stops. I haven't tested these out at all because I just, quite frankly, haven't got around to it, but they're there. Moving along to the sound updates. There have been numerous sound updates within Assetto Corsa, and, well, it's not really discussed all that much in the changelog, but it's definitely different, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. I don't think it's as good as what we've heard from several of the community-created sound mods that sound absolutely fantastic, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. And one of the notable features that's basically all new is the fact that there is now reverb from trackside objects, which means, simply put, if you're driving through a tunnel, it'll sound like you're driving through a tunnel. And when you're driving close to the wall, you'll hear that effect from the sound reverberating off of the wall, which I don't think is quite fully done yet. As is in the game, it does come in a little bit too harshly, but at least that functionality is there, and hopefully the sound modders who have done a good job of making this game sound good as opposed to terrible will work their magic once again and make this game sound even better. At least now they have the tools to do better. That's the way I look at it. And from here, there's 3 more things I'd really like to hit on in this video. First of all, the tire model. Next up, the aerodynamic changes, as well as the AI. I'm going to save the AI for last because I think it kind of makes itself more obvious on the screen. But the driving is basically entirely different. The changes are so large, in fact, I would strongly suggest that you go ahead and test out as many cars as you possibly can and give them a go again, because even cars that you liked previously you may not like now, and cars that you didn't like previously you may end up liking now, because it is a pretty big change and a lot of cars are very different. In terms of how it feels like there's a wider margin for balanced handling. It's less twitchy and less sensitive in terms of getting the car into that happy zone where it's not really understeering or oversteering, just that nice neutral handling. Whereas before it was really easy to get into understeer or get into oversteer. You have a bigger window now, which is more in line with where Assetto Corsa was originally in the earlier versions. However, at the same time, if you do get out of that window, if you do get out of that happy zone where everything is right with the car and everything is happy with the handling, things do get a bit worse at that point. Whereas before with the GT3 cars, for example, you could slide around like an absolute hooligan and basically drift the things, which is pretty ridiculous. There is now a much more defined point where the car is just gone and you can't do anything about it. You're just along for the ride at that point. A lot of people are going to say it's more boring, it's more stable, it's been simplified, but I think it's kind of, again, that same type of thing that we had with the original versions of Assetto Corsa, where it's boring until you really start getting on the throttle, until you start getting on the brakes, until you start getting on the limit, in which case it starts to respond. It's very easy to drive, once again, but at the same time it's not easy to get the maximum out of the car. And perhaps almost as important in terms of the changes to the driving are the aerodynamic model changes. There's a couple of lines in the changelog that are particularly noteworthy. First of all, they've modified the global aero efficiency with yaw angle, which works on all cars, and then a little bit below that is yaw angle stalling of wings and diffusers for the GT2, GT3, as well as the Mercedes C9 and then the Lotus 98T, which basically means that as the car yaws, or basically in simple terms slides through the air, it's going to affect the aerodynamic efficiency and how much downforce, how much drag the car is producing in that particular moment. Now obviously, because we're talking about aerodynamics, these things will be more noticeable at high speed, as well as the cars that they've implemented the wing stalling and changes for. They tend to be higher speed cars anyways. But you'll notice this most in the high speed corners. For example, the Schumacher S at the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit, the fast left-right uphill combination. Previously in Assetto Corsa, it was pretty dang close to flat out. It was basically one of those corners that you just more or less pound on through with the GT cars and just, you know, forcefully pound over the curbs like, and ain't no problem at all. Whereas now, you have to be much more careful. You have to set up for those corners in advance. The car feels like it actually has less downforce in general, and which you'd have to compensate with running more wing angle, or alternatively, you're just going to have to deal with it. Which I think this is also part of the reason why it feels like there's much more bite and much more punishment in Assetto Corsa for when you do get outside of that happy zone with the tires, because now the aerodynamics are just totally different. For example, at Spa, Eau Rouge, and Puhan, previously in the GT3 cars were pretty much simple cakewalk corners, not really a challenge. In fact, Eau Rouge, you could basically flat foot all day, every day, without even thinking about it. Now, that's a corner. You're gonna have to prepare yourself. The first thing I did actually on my outlap, driving the GT3 cars at Spa, I just totally threw the car away at Puhan because I went in there like I did originally, like I did with the previous versions, and it just ain't gonna happen unless you're going to compensate for that change with extra downforce at the back of the car. So it definitely a difference is felt. And finally, moving on to our final topic of the actual idiots. That'd be the artificial intelligence to most of you guys. But they have seen a significant improvement. However, at the same time, they still have serious problems. But they're still significantly improved, which I feel like I must point out because it is definitely a big step in the right direction. Now I'm going to say this, there are some caveats here, which is why I kind of want to explain this a little bit more. First of all, they're still absolutely god-awful terrible at the starts. They're still absolutely god-awful terrible in the first lap, when they're stuck to one another, when they're trying to race one another in that phase that I say, what is the meaning of my life? For AI in a race where they just don't get it. They're both fighting for the same lines. So to counter this, I would suggest running fewer cars on the grid because this will help get them more in the flow of the race and driving normally from thereafter. They still, to a large degree, have the same issue that they've had previously with queuing up behind a car that is slower down the straightaway. For example, if you're running a street car race where you have a car that's really good in the corners but crap down the straights, and a car that's really fast down the straights but totally garbage in the corners, you'll see the same type of thing that you did previously. It has gotten a little bit better. They are a little bit more aware of the strengths and weaknesses, I guess you could say, and they are more willing to go ahead and pass that slower car down the straight, but they still queue up behind it, and it's still a problem. If you're running a GT3 race, for example, or a GT2 race, or a single make cup type of thing, like the Formula Barce or the M235i, it's less of an issue. It does seem to play out more reasonably, and I do get more of the feeling from those scenarios when they're queued up. They're not queued up because they're too stupid to pass, but more so they just can't go any faster. They're at their programmed limits, essentially, and that's why they're stuck behind one another. As for what really makes this a significant improvement, first of all, they have good pace, and I feel like I must point that out because for example, with the GT3 cars, I have to push like mad just to run in the middle of the pack at 100% difficulty, which is the same type of thing I'd expect out of an online race, and it's nice, difficult, and challenging, which is what gives me satisfaction in these games. Now, I imagine for some people, they'll obviously outclass everything and just totally smoke the competition regardless, but I will say I do feel like these are some of the more competitive and more challenging AI within sim racing. And while there hasn't really been a particularly noticeable or massive change in how the AI to AI interaction works, I do think the real improvement with the AI here for version 1.5 is the player to AI interaction. This is sort of difficult to explain, but I think everybody who's ever played a racing game kind of understands this, and that is, it feels right. It feels like they have enough respect for you and your car that they give you enough room when it's relevant to give you enough room, whereas at the same time, they're also more willing to stick to their guns and not just totally give up a corner and be like, "Oh, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, after you, sir," and just totally yield the corner as soon as you get within like 5 miles of them. I think they've really hit on a nice balance between the AI sticking to its line and being very steadfast in that, like a person would be, as well as having enough give to the point where they're not just constantly bashing into you and turning in on you because that's the line that they're running, dang it. I will also say that AI is much more frisky in terms of racing with the player than themselves. Again, it kind of goes back to that problem that they have with they're running the same line as one another and they don't know anything other than that. When you, the player, are running, you're running a different line than what they are, so they can sort of use that to their advantage in places where it's relevant. Now, I will say they don't really pass you all that often, but at least they kind of feel like they're going to pass you. It kind of feels like there's a little bit more intensity there, rather than just knowing, like previously, that once you pass them, they will never pass you because they're stupid and they can't figure it out. At least now they kind of give you the illusion that they're actually trying. So that's basically that for this video. Assetto Corsa 1.5, it's now out, it's now available, and there's some substantial improvements. Who knows what the future of Assetto Corsa will be, but at least it's in a better place now than it was before 1.5. Let's put it that way. So, let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.